Have you guys ever seen a trailer that hits on like an emotional, spiritual, or nostalgic level so hard that you just can't stop thinking about it no matter what? That even when you go back to it years later, you get deep in them feels and you can't quite shake them? Tears welling, watery eyeball sort of thing. There have been a few like that for me in my 25 years of gaming. Most of them were in the Xbox 360 era. Mad World, Last Day, and Dust to Dust for Gears of War. Halo 3 and Halo Reach obviously had some incredible marketing campaigns, probably some of the best ones I've ever seen in gaming in general, maybe any medium, period. Age of Empires 2, Age of Kings, Skyrim, StarCraft 2, I can go on, but to this day, maybe my favorite trailer ever, and if it's not, it's certainly right up there, is the Dawn of War 3 announcement cinematic. Almost a decade on, and yes, the DAO 3 trailer did indeed drop 9 years ago. You are very old. I think it goes down in history as a cinematic masterpiece, and that's really not an exaggeration. It's absolute cinemites. Of course, it's never gonna get the recognition it deserves as a standalone piece because of everything that came after, but I'll stand on business now that Dawn of War 3, despite its launch, support or lack thereof, and subsequent dismantling being a train wreck, an absolute disaster class and what not to do, that it was not a terrible game at its core, that despite some overt and incredibly obvious missteps in art direction, animations, game balance, and a general failure to listen to community feedback that was definitely given to the devs before launch, I truly believe with some more love and attention, it could have become something very solid, and while it may never have reached the lofty standards set by the first two games and its expansions, it could still have been seen as a worthy successor and looked back upon fondly. Unfortunately, the game was essentially dead on arrival and never really got that chance for a myriad of different reasons, and a lot of them were self-inflicted. But even now, almost a decade later, if you ask the average DAO or 40k fan what happened after DAO 2 Retribution, they'll say they're still patiently waiting for the real Dawn of War 3 to materialize from the warp, which may very well be only a couple days away from announcement. Guess what? That's the topic of today's video. Now, let me be very clear. I do not know for sure that Dawn of War 4 is being announced at Skulls for the Skull Throne on Thursday. It is very possible. The game is in development right now as we speak and not ready to be teased or shown in any capacity. And it's possible Relic is moving in a different direction entirely and that Dawn of War 4 never actually happens. But there have been leaks, there have been rumors, and when there are whispers of things happening coming from many different sources that aren't related to each other, it usually means something. Not always, but usually. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Where there's smoke, there tends to be fire, and there's enough smoke here to raise a couple eyebrows at least, so that's why we're discussing it now. It's shaping up to be the craziest Warhammer reveal day in recent memory. I know that some Skulls events in years past have not been very impressive, but if everything that I think is going to happen does indeed come to pass over the next few days, we're going to be eating real good when the ball gets rolling. Space Marine, Dark Tide, Total War, Vermintide, all waiting on deck with a whole bunch of new titles all being announced back to back to back. But while the next Total War game will be announced near to the end of the year and will not be unveiled at Skulls, DAO 4 has a very real chance on Thursday, and I am legitimately excited to see what Relic are cooking here. Because Relic, for all their flaws, for all their faults, for all the problems with DAO 3, I think deserves another chance at the Dawn of War series, and that RTS games, for all intents and purposes, a dying genre now, a dying breed of games that, for many of us, was our introduction into PC gaming in the first place, deserves more of a spotlight. Some of you will disagree with that assessment. You felt burned by DAO 3, and I totally get it. You may not want to put your trust in them again after that remarkable failure, but my hopium and my copium suggests that important lessons have been learned and can be applied moving forward. They've had almost 10 years to ruminate and figure out where it all went wrong. In an ideal world anyway, they'll be able to apply that and make something better than they ever have before, even though it's almost certainly not the same team this long after the fact. Maybe that's not even such a bad thing. That a return to formula with modern visuals, hotkeys, and customization could be a return to glory, not just for the Reforged team, but the RTS genre as a whole. Gaming is better when RTS is thriving, and it just pairs perfectly with Warhammer 40k. So the question is, what do we want to see from Dawn of War 4, if it is indeed in development right now, if it will indeed be announced on Thursday? What kind of features, what kind of art direction, what kind of units, factions, and gameplay would necromance this long-dead franchise from the grave? So general sentiment from my perspective is that the ideal Dawn of War 4 in this day and age would borrow liberally from the best elements of both DAO 1 and DAO 2 with improved graphics, interface, and accessibility. Not exactly a scorching hot take there, I realize. DAO 1 and DAO 2 were very different games, both beloved in their own right. Both had some really good ideas that were implemented fairly elegantly for their time. DAO 1 and its expansions had the benefit of more factions, a grander scale, and expansive base building, something that was highlighted and accentuated even further with mods like Ultimate Apocalypse for Soulstorm. DAO 2, to its benefit and perhaps to its detriment as well, shared a lot of the bones and core construction with Company of Heroes, with an in-depth cover system, destructible environments, and an intense focus on squad-based combat with smaller, more personal engagements. Now, I personally preferred the focus on tactics and individual unit engagements in DAO 2. I really liked the retreat mechanic, which allowed you to preserve units and made them feel more important as you leveled them up throughout the course of battle, but it also let you outplay and heavily punish people with poor positioning when they would just retreat, not thinking about what their retreat path was. You could grenade or melee them on retreat and wipe them, and those wipes felt extremely meaningful, in contrast to a game like Dawn of War 3, where even the mainline infantry like Space Marines felt very squishy and were just exploding on contact with the enemy. And to that point, I liked that my squads were not expendable in Dawn of War 2, which, particularly when it came to factions like Ordo Malleus or Space Marines, makes a good deal of sense. It should be hard to kill a Grey Knight, it should be hard to kill a Stern Guard veteran, and that losing a full squad of TAC Marines in many cases was backbreaking, game-losing type of stuff, but you had to really screw up to have that happen in the first place, at least in early game, and that it accentuated the differences between factions, where greenskins and Tyranids would be bleeding models left and right, but it'd be kind of a big win to kill a single model off a TAC Marine squad, much less wipe an entire unit of them. It's one element I really disliked in Dawn of War 3, the general squishiness of elite Astartes squads being thrown into the meat grinder like cannon fodder and just exploding on contact anytime they engage anything. But while those individual troop engagements and heavy emphasis on abilities was really attractive for some when it comes to Dawn of War 2, I also really appreciate that many prefer the scale and variety of something like Ultimate Apocalypse. I think there's a middle ground between the two that could be reached, and if it came alongside a grand campaign a la Total War, well, that'd be all the better. Now, one element that got a lot of backlash and accusations of being a MOBA, which, by the way, I don't really even think of as an insult, considering how inextricably linked the two genres are and can be, look no further than the relationship between Warcraft 3 and Dota 2 as an example, was the focus on special heroes and abilities in DAO 3. And I'll be honest, even though it was one of the central arguments against Dawn of War 3, how MOBA-like it was, even before launch, I never really hated that element. I won't say they got the balance right there, but a huge element of 40k is those special characters with powerful weapons, unleashing them to their fullest potential. Abaddon with Draknian, Gilliman with the Sword of the Emperor, the Phoenix Lords of the Eldar, Ahriman, Trazen the Infinite, Ivrain, Mortarion, what have you. Seeing Autarch Kyr or Farseer Taldir and Maka popping off with visually impressive and powerful abilities never really bothered me in DAO 3, and while there's absolutely an argument to be made they were too game-changing, too impactful, and maybe rendered line infantry like Space Marines a bit anemic when they should have felt more powerful than they did, I don't think the idea was inherently bad. I don't know that we can or will get the Primarchs or the Chapter Masters or the true top-level army book heroes of each and every faction, but I do not mind seeing named characters explode a group of Sluggaboys with psychic powers or a big freaking gun. If that's MOBA to you, that's fine. You can use whatever buzzwords you want for it, but I just think that's kind of badass. A leveled up Farseer should be able to explode a squadron of Sluggaboys. The real issue, of course, and where a lot of the backlash came from, was seeing Gabriel Angelos doing backflips and dunking like LeBron James in Terminator armor. As we said, the squishiness of Space Marines being thrown into the meat grinder, their long, loping, floaty run animations that lacked weight and impact, the general color palette and art direction didn't really convey the elements of 40k many of us would have liked to have seen. In many ways, I think you could argue it felt cartoonish. Not to mention it had that weird blue filter and lighting that hung over everything like a cloud. A darker, grittier atmosphere, not devoid of color or flash, but maybe not quite so overt in its lurid garishness, would be greatly appreciated in a Dawn of War 4. as would some spicier starting factions. I totally get why Space Marines, Eldar, and Greenskins are kind of the starting blueprint for every 40k game, and I fully expect something similar if and when Total War 40k comes around, but I'd like to see something different on launch day for once. A game like this is ripe for faction DLC if it sells well initially. If Greenskins aren't there on launch, you could definitely sell them later down the line, but I think we can expand our horizons a bit and add some flavor in those starting rosters, whether that be Necrons, Tau, Gene Stealer cults, or the Great Devourer at large. I'd like to see something different this time around. Faction diversity is really important. I'd say it's one of the biggest selling factors in general. We don't need to keep rehashing the same starting factions every time a new game comes along. In fact, I don't think there's really any evidence to suggest that Greenskins would sell the base game much better than, say, Necrons or Nids. And then there's the grounded nature of combat. In Dawn of War 2, when a Predator tank fires into a group of Sluggas or Jump Squad and you see a model just straight up explode, that's incredibly satisfying. When you see Terminators lurching their way into combat, ambling, pushing forward inexorably under a hail of gunfire, you really feel their weight, you feel their power, you see that they are elite compared to a lot of the other Swarm factions. That was a vibe I didn't get quite as much in Dawn of War 3. It's definitely one of the more important elements of a 40k game. Now, I'm a bit torn on base building personally. I think there's benefits and drawbacks to having or not having it in the game. I've had viewers and community members explicitly talk about their desire to build listening posts and operational forward bases, ramparts and battlements to be able to seize locations and objectives, to establish a foothold and gather resources, to be responsible for recovering wounded units or disabled vehicles to evac, to resupply, and to have really big maps that accommodate those mechanics, to move away from the lanes that perhaps reflect those MOBA elements. Lanes were definitely a big element of some of the Dawn of War 2 maps for sure, and instead let people spread out and explore in a more traditional RTS sense, to have more flexibility, more realistic battlefield maps where you can spread out and go where you want and not really feel like you're locked down in a particular lane. And I think we can all agree we'd like more gravitas and to see less of those cartoonish animations which really stuck out like a sore thumb in Dawn of War 3. If you want a good explanation or example of that, just take a look at TAC Marines running in that game and you'll get a very good idea of what exactly I mean by that. But on the flip side, I like to get right into the action when I play. I prefer units and military over eco and infrastructure, and I've simply never really enjoyed the villager micro or the building of farms and harvesting of animals in a game like Age of Empires, where if I haven't hit these hyper-specific timing windows with 7 sheep, 3 deer, and 69 trees harvested in the first 92 seconds, it's game blouses. It's over for me. I should just give up and commit ritual Sudoku because I'm trash. It's why, even though StarCraft 2 on paper looks really appealing, I would never and could never get into it. I'm too old at this point. Game's too figured out at this point. The micro requirements for a game like that are insane and well above anything you would ever need for a Total War game, for example. It's a big reason why, even though I absolutely adore the aesthetic and vibes of Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, I've sunk very little time into it because the learning curve is just absurd at this point, and the game's solved to the tiniest minutia of detail. To the point where, again, if you haven't hit 17 pop cap and 537 food by 27 seconds into the match, you should just call GG because even the mid-level dude with 300 hours will absolutely raffle stomp you now because you're an idiot. I personally prefer that emphasis on squad level tactics and seeing the big cool units kill each other and explode. So while I absolutely would love for the scale to get bigger in Dawn of War 4, for the armies to become grander, for the explosions and all that visual grandeur to really pop, I don't personally need base building in Dawn of War 4, but I totally get why a lot of y'all want it, and I can respect it, and I would not complain if it was added in the next game. But the big thing for me, and I've talked about it in Total War and pretty much any other RTS game I've ever discussed, those differences between factions need to be accentuated as much as possible. I want the Tyranids and Greenskins to feel like this unstoppable swarm with way more models per unit. I want the Custodes, or the Grey Knights of the Space Marines, to be very elite and small in number, especially when Dreads and Termies start hitting the field. I want the unit rosters to be wide enough and varied enough to encourage many different playstyles and approaches, even within a singular faction. So if I want to go like a quick blitzkrieg rush with Assault Marines, I can do that, or I can build for the long game and start building into the heavy armor stuff, the Predators, all that, Land Raiders, and perhaps even minor faction traits like Blood Angels having bonuses to assault troops and of course having unique units like Elite Sanguinary Guard, while the Dark Angels would have, let's say, better plasma upgrades, that sort of thing. There is a lot that could be done with a potential Dawn of War 4. I do have a vibe, a general feeling that if announcement does not come on Thursday, that we will not be waiting all that long for an announcement, that it might be within the next 6 to 9 months. Again, I do not know that. I have zero insider information on this particular topic, but beyond the hopium, beyond the copium, I do think there is a very decent shot that Dawn of War 4 is currently in development if those leaks and rumors and elements that I've heard from many different sources are coalescing into actual fact, but only time will tell. What I'm curious about is what you all want to see in terms of units, lords, factions, abilities, and the general art style and direction moving forward. What elements from the first 3 games do you absolutely want to see, and which do you think would be or should be left by the wayside, ultimately avoided? Let me know in the comment section below, and tune in tomorrow for some of the major reveals still to come. I'm Eddie Pride from Milk and Cookies Total War, and I will see you in the next video.